everybody, and welcome back to the next part in my guitar solo analysis video series for my YouTube channel, which you're watching. This is a series I started a while back. I don't do a lot of these, but they are fun every now and then to break things up. And I haven't done one in a while, but earlier this week I did a dialing in video for our Line 6 Helix that was for a Robben Ford-ish style tone, and I used his song Rugged Road from his Handful of Blues album with Robben Ford and the Blue Line. Always loved that tone, as I'd mentioned in the dialing in video. But in learning the solo, I realized, man, this is such a great solo to show how Robben solos over changes and some of the tools that he uses. That I thought it might be a really cool one to go over, and there's a lot of really cool little things to learn here in how he handles playing over certain changes. So I wanted to dive into that and kind of take us through the first solo anyways. So I have it up here on Guitar Pro. Let's dive right over. I'm using my Yamaha SA2200 into my Helix today. These videos, it's a little weird because I'm talking a lot. I get the high quality audio mixed in with the camera audio, so it's not a real tone showcase, it's more just so you can hear what I'm playing. But the preset that I'm using is the Robben Ford preset. That is up on Custom Tone, and I'll put the link below for those that are interested. Every time I do one of these videos, I have somebody asking, what's the tone you use, you know? But it's, again, remember, you're hearing a little bit of camera audio mixed in there, so. Okay, so let's dive over to Guitar Pro 7, which I have up on the screen. This is a tab that I found online and just made some corrections to. I'm not sure if everything is absolutely bang on the way I played it in my performance video. A lot of these things I'll learn, but then kind of add my own slight little flair to it, as we all probably should with anything. It's very hard to mimic particular styles, especially Robben's. He has a very interesting, unique style. So first things first, let's go through and take a look at the chord progression that he's playing over top of. We have somewhere around a 24-ish bar solo, 25-ish bar solo, something like that. It's 24. He goes here and starts off. Some of these chords are just implied. It's kind of weird. A lot of it is just like a bass line playing under with the guitar doubling it, and then every now and then there's kind of a rhythm guitar throwing some chords in, but it's not really consistent. So some of these chords are implied by the overall tonality of the song and the bass, and I'm not sure if there's maybe some organ on there, possibly. You know, I can't remember now. But anyways, the chords that are written here are implied or played by rhythm guitar at some points, okay? So we start off with a D7th, and if you look, he's on that for 4 bars, and then he kind of switches on upbeats here, a sort of syncopated feel on his switches, right? So he'll be playing his D7. You know, he kind of comes in, you know, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and so those are where the switches are coming in. B7th for 1, 2, 3, 4 bars. Another sort of syncopated upbeat switch back to a D7. 4 bars of that. And then, sorry about that. And then back to B7th again, and 4 bars of that. Then he switches off to an E9th chord, okay? Pretty typical bluesy thing to do before going back, and he does 4 bars there and then 4 bars on a D7th, okay? So okay, that's the idea. I wasn't playing the full 4 bars, just to get you to hear what the tonality was like. Okay, so how does Robben handle this? Well, let's talk a little bit about soloing over dominant chords. What he is using here are all dominant chords. We see D7th, B7th, and E9. E9 is still a dominant chord. It's a dominant 7th chord, but it has an extension on it, which is the 9th. Okay, so the intervallic or interval spelling of a dominant chord would be the root, the 3rd, the 5th, and a flat 7th, okay? And that's what gives its interesting sound. It could almost be thought of as a cross between a major 7th and a minor 7th. A major 7th intervals are 1, 3, 5, 7. A minor 7th is one with a flat 3, or a minor 3rd, a 5th, and a minor 7th, or a flat 7th. So 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7. So we're kind of taking the major 3rd, so the major tonality of the 3rd, but putting a minor 7th with it, and that's what creates the dominant sound. And in the case of the E9, put the 9 in there. Still have our 1, 3, and our flat 7, and our 9, right? Well, the interesting thing about that then with dominant chords is that it creates a slight, what could be considered a problem, let's say. You know, a lot of players like to say, oh, let's playing with a B7th. I'm just going to play pentatonic. The only problem is the major third doesn't exist in a pentatonic scale. It's in a minor pentatonic scale. So we could go do a B major pentatonic. Right? Works as well. But a lot of players, what they choose to do is take the minor pentatonic scale and add the major third in after the minor third. So we can do that kind of all over the place if we learn where the minor third is, and then just move up 1 fret from it. Blues players, country players, anybody playing over these dominant chords really likes to put that in. And playing that minor third over the dominant chord gives it a kind of interesting tension. It's a very typical sound we've heard in a lot of places, okay? So that's one way to handle it. The other way would simply be to outline the arpeggios, right? So in the case of B7th here, I was adding a couple extra notes, but just the strict arpeggio, right? So if we're playing so knowing where those are as well is going to help us to give us another tool. And then there's the other way of just strictly using the mixolydian scale over top of it as well. In the case of a B7th, that would be the E major scale. Right? So those are the options. We can use our minor pentatonic with the major third thrown in. We could go touch on the major pentatonic, or we could use mixolydian, or we could just use the dominant 7th arpeggios. Well, let's take a look at what Robben did and break this down sort of chord by chord, okay? So over this D7th, he plays some phrasing like this. And right there is where he would change to the B7. So let's break this down a lick at a time. What we see here, I have a video up, I did a long time ago, a lesson video about learning your pentatonics all over the fretboard. I'll put a link to that. Go check that video out because I really go through and talk about covering your whole fretboard with pentatonic scales, and we're going to see how useful that is here. So many folks know, you know, the sort of what I call the root pattern. But then they're maybe not able to move around as easily. you know, covering the entire fretboard. So what Robben's doing here really is he's kind of basing it around this D minor pentatonic, and he's going to throw these major thirds in like I was talking about. So this first phrase really comes from this D minor pentatonic scale. The one that would be right before kind of the root pattern, starting on the root note. So the phrase is, but right here now we got to be careful. He adds in this E note, right? Which isn't part of, it's more like part of mixolydian. What's interesting next is he slides into, lands on the D, but he slides into that major third we were talking about. Okay, so the phrase, so really, in conjunction with this E note in there, we can start thinking of this more as mixolydian for an instant, right? Because over the D7th, the mixolydian would be like a G major or E minor, however you want to think of it. Right? So he's kind of borrowing a note from that, and then coming in, adding that major third in that would be part of our D7th chord, right? So again, now he gets into what sort of looks like the typical pentatonic pattern for D minor, but he's going to add that major third in with the minor third, and then a little bit of that kind of mixolydian mode again, right? So this phrase then is this. Before switching to the B7th, okay? So far, so you can see here, very typical D minor pentatonic scale. With that major third added in again. Little mixolydian. Then he switches to the B7th. Okay, so just like I was mentioning before, pentatonic scales, touching on mixolydian and touching on adding that major third in. Okay, so now we hear a real tonality change there to the B7th chord. So what's he do? Well, he lands first of all right on the B basically when the chord changes, right? Now you can see so he's in this position. He could switch just to the B minor pentatonic. What's interesting is to be able to superimpose one scale over the other. So while I'm here knowing that I'm in my kind of thinking D minor pentatonic, I can also know that see how I could switch between D minor and B minor without even sort of batting an eye, right? And then if I'm in this B minor scale, I know that I can switch very quickly into my D minor without changing positions again. Okay, so it's pretty interesting to be able to just superimpose those without having to, thinking like, oh, I'm in B minor, now I've got to switch to D minor, and just kind of sticking to the same pattern, right? I can be here. and be able to move between those regardless of where you are without having to make a big overt kind of position shift. Okay, so here he is on the B. Nice little bluesy bend. He's now, you can see where he's thinking probably more B minor pentatonic and adding those major thirds in. But he does something interesting here with the bend. So that's his phrase. So let's see what he did there. You can kind of see he gets into B minor pentatonic territory again, but he's adding in this note, which gives actually a Dorian tonality that he's playing over top of the B7th, which is pretty interesting. So right there into sort of a bluesy thing. Very typical B minor pentatonic type thing. Does a real cool lick here, pulling off to the B string. He's utilizing the open strings because he knows he's on a B tonality. So maybe he'd do Thunderstruck over. Just kidding. So he goes to this pull off. There's your Dorian tonality. Kind of a cool lick. Okay, so really, still doing kind of the B minor pentatonic thing. And there's your major third to pull it back into this dominant sound, right? So wonderful lick. So far, B7th. Okay, before they get to the D7th, he does this kind of a funny sweeping thing. It's notated like this, but it almost sounds just more like he's just kind of almost like rolling into this to get us back to the D7th chord, right? Okay, so now what are we doing here? Well, what we actually see are the notes on the D7th. Hopefully all that's clear so far. So he is using those tools that I kind of pointed out before, right? Kind of focusing on the pentatonic scales. Adding the major third in, adding some mixolydian and some dorian notes in. So really, really beautiful playing by Robben over this. If we look at this next phrase over the D7th again, that's back to the B7. So what's he doing again? Well, if we look at these notes, these are actually all coming from basically an E minor scale or a G major scale, however you want to think of it. Right? So what tonality is that? Well, again, mixolydian, right? Sorry, that was a little sloppy there, but right, that note is really from, again, if we look at our B minor pentatonic, there's that major third, but this note isn't in the pentatonic anymore. So he keeps adding that E note in, right? And that's and there you notice there's a little passing tone, right? That note is really not in the scale at all, and if you land on that, it's kind of a major 7th tonality. So he's just using that as a passing tone. So and he lands on the C note, which is a major chord tone, right? In the D7th chord, okay? So that's kind of cool. Okay, so really different tonality by simply going up to the mixolydian mode again. Then he goes back into more of a typical D minor pentatonic blues with adding that third in there, right? So right? So everybody recognizes those patterns. Before getting back to our B7th, okay? So really neat the way he goes between mixolydian back to just kind of more of a blues feel, minor blues feel. Right? So pretty interesting stuff yet again. Then he goes back to our B7. Okay, very, very interesting phrasing here. And for the most part here, once he goes to the B7, the notes are just coming from an E major scale again. Which gives it that B mixolydian tonality. So he lands on the B note when he switches to the B7th. Right? All from B mixolydian here. So just like he did last time when he switched to the D7th and went into kind of a minor tonality. Sticking with the mixolydian to introduce the chord again. This is where it gets interesting. Very outside jazzy sound here. Now again, one of the videos I did before for guitar solo analysis, I think it was for Kid Charlemagne, I talked a lot about how Larry Carlton would throw in these passing tones, but for the most part try to land on chord tones or scale tones on the important parts of the beat. And if you notice, Robben kind of does a similar thing here. Those are chord tones, not so much, right? Not a scale tone. You got to remember, we're in B mixolydian, so if we land there, it doesn't sound good, but if we pass through it, and if you notice he's on, if you're counting this in 16th notes, 1E and he hits that on the which is not really one of the more emphasized portions of the beat, right? So, lands on the F sharp on the downbeat. If you notice again, not a chord tone, everything else was chord tones. But on the downbeat, he lands back on a chord tone, back to this note on the 3E and so the E of the 16th notes, right? Back to chord tones off of a chord tone again on the 3E and of the beat, right? Do you get what I'm saying here? So if you notice when I emphasize the notes on the downbeat, those passing tones just kind of fall in between, and that's an important part to phrasing this right. Right, and that's what you get out of it. So really still based around that mixolydian, but he's adding in these passing tones. Really neat stuff. And really then, just like he did in this previous phrase, this is so cool. He started off 2 measures of playing a very kind of mixolydian based idea, and then he went back to kind of the minor tonality based off of the pentatonic scale with the major third added in. He did the exact same thing here. A couple measures of strict mixolydian. Back into a pentatonic style pattern now. Of B minor. But throwing in that major third note. So you can see it when you analyze this, you see that he's using these techniques, and it just flows out of him because he's so used to this, right? So that whole B7th phrase, so mixolydian. right, so far so good, hope so. Hope you're understanding and following, hope I'm explaining it right. And then the E9th chord. Okay, so the E9th chord, again, now we can think of being up in our E minor pentatonic scale pattern, but adding those major thirds in. Right, and that's exactly kind of what he does. He bends in, if you notice, half a step bend here. So what he's doing is he's bending between the minor third and the major third. So that, who said we have to play it? Why can't we just bend between it? And then he goes up to the major third, bends up to an A, real cool. So it's like going, but much more interesting than just playing A, G sharp, you know. And again, we recognize the patterns he's using. Looks like just typical E minor pentatonic. Major third again. There's the major third. Right? So that whole phrase. All right. Pretty neat stuff, but you see he's following the same basic formula. Right? When he switches between those chords, B7th, except he's just getting it to flow all together very effortlessly. Okay, then back to the last chord change, D7th. Really comes in with like a Dorian-ish sound here. Again, like he touched on before. Remember that phrase? Right? That over top of the B7th. There's your Dorian sound, right? Now he's going up to our D7th and he's going, add a little bit of tension there. But then right back into kind of what seems like a typical D minor pentatonic, right? Little break in the phrasing. This is just a very typical D minor pentatonic scale. Using those two shapes, those two patterns. Okay. All right. Notice how he touches on the major third again with a bend. Right? Very interesting stuff. Again, he didn't have to go, but he could have. Again, a very tiny little bend touching on that major seventh so that it ties in better with the D7. So a touch on Dorian. And the rest is just D minor pentatonic. Okay, so all together, D7th. B7th. Right, D7th. Little passing note. D7th. E9th. D7th. All right. I hope I explained that well, guys. I hope I didn't whip through it too quickly. These videos can get kind of long, but I hope that helps you to kind of see and dissect what Robben does, and playing over some of these cool bluesy changes and playing over dominant chords. And some of the tools we have at our disposal that can really help us to improve our playing. And that's really what this is all about. Not necessarily mimicking Robben's lines, although this is a fun solo to play, but more about learning how we can add new ideas into our playing, which I think is the really cool takeaway from all of this. That if we can learn one or two new licks to throw in, in our own way, in our solos when we're playing over these, that's when this is even, more of a success in analyzing these, I think. So this is a fun one. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you have any questions, leave them for me in the comments below, and I'll be sure to try and get back and answer those for you. Thanks so much for tuning in. Check out my presets on Line 6 Marketplace too. I have some up there. They've been doing very well. A lot of people getting a lot of positive feedback from them. I really appreciate that support as well. And I'll be back soon with some more content. Thank you so much for tuning in, guys, and we will talk very soon.